Every savings milestone doesn't just give you more money. It unlocks a door that was completely closed to you before. And what's behind each one? Most people have absolutely no idea. Until today.
Picture this, it's a Tuesday night. Nothing special about it. You're lying in bed, phone in hand, and for some reason you open your banking app. Maybe you're checking if a payment cleared. Maybe you're just bored, and then you see the number, and something tightens in your chest. It's not a catastrophic number, you're not in crisis, but it's lower than you want it to be. Lower than you told yourself it would be by now. And you close the app, put your phone down, stare at the ceiling and think, how is it still this low? If that moment feels familiar, this video is for you. Because today we're going to do something that almost no one does. We're going to map out what financial life actually looks and feels like at every major savings milestone. Not in theory, not in spreadsheet projections, in real daily psychological practical reality, from 0 to 1,000 to 10,000 to 100,000, all the way to 1 million. And I want you to understand something before we start. This is not a video about rich people. This is a video about thresholds, because what I've learned and what the research actually backs up is that every single one of those numbers doesn't just change your bank balance. It changes your options, your stress level, your relationships, your risk tolerance, your decision-making, and your entire identity around money. Everything changes, and most people have no idea which threshold they need to cross next or what crossing it actually requires. So let's start at the beginning. Let's start at 0. 0 doesn't mean you have nothing. 0 means your savings account is empty or close enough that it doesn't matter. Maybe you have a checking account with a few $100s that gets cleared out every pay cycle. Maybe you've got some cash in your wallet. But when it comes to a cushion, a buffer, a number you could point to and say, that's my safety net, 0 means it doesn't exist. And here's the thing about living at 0 that people who've never been there don't fully understand. And people who are there right now know in their bones, 0 is expensive. I don't mean expensive in the abstract sense. I mean it literally costs you more money to be at 0 than to have savings. Think about how life works at 0. Your car makes a noise. You don't have the $400 to fix it properly, so you ignore it until it becomes a $1,200 problem, which you put on a credit card at 24% interest because you have no other option. Your phone breaks. You can't buy a replacement outright, so you get onto a payment plan that costs you $40 a month for 24 months, for a phone that would have cost $600 cash. You need to move apartments. You can't cover first and last month's rent without wiping yourself out, so you end up in a worse place than you could afford because you can't access the better options. 0 locks you out of efficiency. And efficiency in personal finance is one of the main drivers of wealth. A Federal Reserve report from 2023 found that 37% of American adults could not cover an unexpected $400 expense with cash or savings. Not $400,000. $400. That's the level of financial fragility that exists in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And the people in that 37% aren't all low earners. Many of them have decent incomes. They're just living at 0. Here's the metaphor I want you to hold. Living at 0 is like driving a car with the fuel light on at all times. The car still works. You can still get places. But every single decision you make, do I take the highway or the back road? Do I stop for groceries or wait until tomorrow? Has this background hum of, what if I run out? That low-level financial panic never fully turns off, and that noise is expensive too, not just psychologically, but cognitively. Research from Princeton shows that financial stress consumes mental bandwidth the way too many apps running in the background drain a phone battery. Your capacity for good decision-making, long-term thinking, and emotional regulation actually decreases when you're financially stressed. 0 doesn't just hurt your wallet, it diminishes your thinking. The move out of 0 is not complicated, but it is psychologically harder than it sounds, because at 0, every dollar that comes in has somewhere it needs to go. The key is not finding a bigger income first. The key is creating a wedge, any wedge, between what comes in and what goes out. $5, $10, $20 a paycheck that never gets touched. The goal at 0 is not to save money. The goal at 0 is to stop being at 0. Now, let's talk about $1,000. If you've never had $1,000 saved at one time, I want you to understand what crossing that threshold actually does, not just numerically, but psychologically. Because something genuinely shifts when you go from 0 to 1,000. The fuel light turns off. That's the best way I can describe it. You still have a relatively small amount of money. $1,000 is not going to change your life. It's not going to make you wealthy. It's not going to cover a major emergency on its own, but it does something that 0 cannot do. It creates breathing room. With $1,000 saved, you can handle the $400 car repair without going into debt. You can cover an unexpected medical bill without panicking. You can handle a gap between paychecks. You have, for the first time, a response to life's small emergencies that isn't credit card debt. And this matters enormously, not just practically but psychologically, because what $1,000 really gives you is your first experience of money working as a buffer rather than as a destination. Here's something remarkable about the psychology of saving that I think explains why so many people get stuck. A study published in the Journal of Consumer Research found that people who reach their first savings milestone, regardless of how small, are significantly more likely to continue saving than people who haven't. The act of reaching a number, any number, creates what researchers call a savings identity. You start to see yourself as someone who saves, and identity drives behavior far more powerfully than information or intention. This is why the first $1,000 is not just $1,000. It's the moment your brain starts to reorganize around a new version of you. But here's the limitation of $1,000 that people often don't talk about. $1,000 is enough to handle small emergencies, but it is not enough to handle medium ones. A job loss, a car that needs replacing, not just repairing, a health issue that requires time off work, a relationship change that requires moving. For all of those things, $1,000 gives you a few more days of peace of mind before the same panic returns. And this is where most people make the mistake of staying. They get to $1,000, they feel better, the acute financial stress reduces, and the urgency to keep saving disappears. The treadmill slows down, and they get off. And then an emergency happens. They spend $1,000, they're back at zero, and the cycle restarts. The move from $1,000 to $10,000 is where real financial change begins, but it requires you to stay uncomfortable even when you don't feel uncomfortable anymore. $10,000. I want to take a moment here because I think $10,000 is the most underrated milestone in personal finance. It doesn't get talked about the way $100,000 does. It doesn't have the cultural weight of $1 million. But in terms of the practical and psychological change it creates in your daily life, $10,000 might be the most significant threshold of all five. Here's why. $10,000 is, for most people, a fully funded emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of basic expenses covered, which means, and really think about what this means in practice, you can lose your job and not immediately be in crisis. You can have a health emergency and not immediately be in debt. You can leave a bad situation, a bad job, a bad relationship, a bad living arrangement without being held there by financial desperation. That last one is the one people don't talk about enough. Financial desperation is one of the most powerful forces keeping people stuck in situations that are costing them far more than money. The person who stays in a miserable job for years because they can't afford to leave. The person who stays in a damaging relationship because they can't cover rent alone. The person who doesn't start the business because they have no runway if it doesn't immediately work. $10,000 is not just a savings number, it's a freedom number. For the first time, you have options that didn't exist at 0 or at 1,000. A study by the Urban Institute found that families with even a small amount of liquid savings, as little as $2,000, were significantly less likely to experience hardship after a financial disruption than families with higher incomes but no savings. Let me repeat that. Lower income, some savings. Better outcomes than higher income, no savings. That's the power of the buffer. And $10,000 is where the buffer stops being symbolic and starts being genuinely protective. The other thing that changes at $10,000 is your relationship with opportunity. Below $10,000, financial decisions are mostly defensive. You're protecting yourself from bad outcomes. At $10,000 and above, you start to be able to make offensive financial decisions. You can invest for the first time with real money. You can take a small calculated risk. You can spot an opportunity and actually act on it. You go from playing defense to playing offense. How do you get to $10,000 from $1,000? The same way you got to $1,000 from 0, systematically, automatically, and without relying on motivation. You increase the wedge. You make the number bigger that moves before you can see it. You raise your savings rate by 5% and don't let lifestyle creep absorb the difference. You treat the gap between $1,000 and $10,000 as the most important financial project you currently have, because it is. $100,000. Look, I'm going to be straight with you. The jump from $10,000 to $100,000 is the longest and hardest stretch on this entire journey. It requires years, not months. It requires consistency during periods when consistency feels pointless. It requires watching your friends buy things you're choosing not to buy and holding the line anyway. But what waits on the other side of 100,000 is something that changes your financial life in a way that is genuinely difficult to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it yet. Compound interest becomes real. At $1,000, compound interest is a rounding error. It's a few cents a month. At $10,000, it's a few dollars a month, better, but still largely symbolic. But at $100,000 invested at a historical average market return, you're looking at somewhere between $7,000 and $10,000 in annual growth, without adding a single new dollar. Your money is now making more money while you sleep, while you work, while you spend time with your family, while you do literally anything else. This is the threshold where money starts to behave differently. Below 100,000, your wealth is almost entirely a function of your labor. You work, you earn, you save. Above 100,000, your wealth starts to have its own engine. It's small at first, but it's there, and it grows. Fidelity's analysis of their account data found that investors who reached $100,000 in retirement savings saw their accounts reach $200,000 roughly twice as fast as it took them to go from zero to $100,000. Not because they changed their behavior, because compound growth at scale accelerates on its own. The second 100,000 takes less time than the first, even with no change in contribution. The other thing that changes at 100,000 is your identity. Again, but more deeply. At 1,000, you became someone who saves. At 100,000, you become someone who has wealth. Not rich, not financially free, but wealthy in a way that is distinct from income. You could lose your job today and survive for years. You have a foundation. You have a number that means something. Here's what I want to address about the psychological barrier to 100,000, because it's real and most people don't talk about it. Somewhere around the $30,000 to $50,000 mark, the journey to 100,000 starts to feel impossibly long. You've been doing everything right for years and you're still not there. The number feels arbitrary. The sacrifice feels exhausting. This is the zone where most people quietly give up, not dramatically, not consciously, just gradually. They stop automating. They start spending a bit more. The savings rate slips, and they plateau. The antidote to this is not more motivation. It's a clear, vivid understanding of what 100,000 actually unlocks. The compounding engine, the freedom, the identity shift. So that when the fatigue hits, you have a reason that is bigger than the discomfort. $1 million. I want to be careful here because I think the cultural narrative around $1 million is so loaded that it gets in the way of people actually thinking clearly about what it means. $1 million is not retirement for most people. At a standard 4% safe withdrawal rate, the benchmark used by most financial planners, $1 million generates $40,000 a year in income. In many cities, that's a modest but livable amount. In others, it's tight. $1 million is not set for life in the way that movies and culture suggest. But here's what $1 million actually is, and why it matters more than the number itself. $1 million is proof of a system. Nobody, and I mean nobody, accidentally accumulates $1 million. It doesn't happen through luck, through one good year, or through a windfall. Every person who reaches $1 million in invested savings got there through a specific, consistent, repeatable set of behaviors maintained over a long period of time. High savings rate. Low lifestyle inflation, consistent investment, avoidance of catastrophic financial mistakes. Time. The $1 million isn't the achievement. The system that produced it is the achievement, and the system that produced $1 million will produce 2 million and 3, because the behaviors and the compounding engine are still running. At $1 million, your money is generating somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 per year depending on your returns. That figure, in many cases, matches or exceeds the median American salary, and it requires 0 hours of your labor. Your invested wealth is now effectively a full-time employee working for you every single hour of every single day. JP Morgan's 2023 Guide to Retirement shows that a portfolio of $1 million invested in a balanced index fund strategy has historically doubled approximately every 10 years, which means at $1 million, if you simply stopped contributing entirely, you'd have $2 million in a decade, $4 million in 2 decades, $8 million in 3 decades, without adding another dollar. This is the compounding engine at full power, and this is why the behaviors that get you to $1 million, saving rate, consistency, time, are the same behaviors that build genuine, generational wealth beyond it. Here's the uncomfortable truth about why most people never reach $1 million. It's not income. The median household income in the U.S. is around $74,000 a year, A household earning $74,000, saving 20%, investing consistently in index funds from age 25, and not touching the money will statistically reach $1 million before retirement. The math works. The behavior is the variable. And behavior comes back to identity, which comes back to the first 1,000. Which comes back to the first time you felt the fuel light turn off, which comes back to a Tuesday night, a banking app, a number lower than you wanted, and the decision you make about what to do next. So here's where all of this lands. Every milestone we talked about today isn't a destination, it's a threshold. And every threshold doesn't just change your number, it changes what is possible. At 0, you're playing pure defense. Every financial move is reactive. At 1,000, you get your first real buffer. The fuel light turns off. You start building an identity as someone who saves. At 10,000, you get freedom. Real, practical, life-changing freedom from financial desperation. You can leave bad situations. You can take small risks. You go from defense to offense. At 100,000, the engine turns on. Your money starts making money on its own. Compounding becomes real. Your wealth is no longer entirely a function of your labor. At 1 million, you have proof of a system. A system that works automatically, that grows on its own, and that will outlast any single year, any single job, any single economic cycle. Now, here's the only question that actually matters. Which threshold are you trying to cross right now? Not eventually, not someday. Right now, this month, this year. Because here's the thing that I've seen derail more people than any other single factor, trying to think about all the milestones at once, getting paralyzed by the distance between 0 and 1 million when the only move that matters is the very next one. If you're at 0, your only job is to get to 1,000. That's it. Nothing else matters right now. Open a savings account. Automate a transfer. Make it $20 if that's what it takes. But break the 0. If you're at 1,000, your job is to protect it and grow it toward 10. Raise the automated transfer. Reduce one spending category. Don't touch it. If you're working toward 100,000, your job is to stay consistent through the fatigue, not to earn more, not to find a better investment, to stay the course when staying the course feels pointless. And if you're approaching or beyond 100,000, your job is to learn the next level, to understand investment vehicles, tax efficiency, asset allocation, because the skills that got you to 100,000 are not the same skills that optimize the journey to 1 million. Every threshold requires a different version of you, and building that version is the work. The fuel light is on for too many people right now. It doesn't have to stay on. Start today. With whatever you have, whatever that number is, see you in the next one. Like and subscribe for more video like this. If you have any question for me, leave a comment down below. I would be happy to help.